By the time my children staged the gas leak, I already knew they'd been drugging me with antipsychotics, and the cameras hidden in my own kitchen were waiting to expose them. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. I am Richard Hale, 73 years old, a grandfather to Lily and Sam, and a widower who still talks to his wife's photo before bed. I am not senile. I am not unsafe. But according to my children, Laura, David, and Ben, I am suddenly fragile, overwhelmed, and in need of a comfortable retirement community where you'll have friends, Dad. They said it gently, like vultures cooing over meat. I was not always this man in a quiet house with a stack of pill bottles on the counter. Once, I was a husband who laughed in the kitchen while my wife Elaine burned Sunday pancakes just to see if she could make the kids eat them. I was the father who taught Laura how to change a tire in the driveway, who steadied David's bicycle when he was 7, and who sat through Ben's endless high school band concerts with a smile, no matter how badly the trumpets blared. I worked 37 years in computer systems, long enough to see the world change from punch cards to smartphones, before I finally let myself retire. Elaine and I had plans for travel, quiet mornings, and watching our grandchildren grow up together. Life, however, has a way of shattering blueprints. Cancer took her in a matter of months, and I have been alone in this house ever since. Alone, but not helpless. I mow the lawn. I fix the faucet when it leaks. I drive myself to church on Sundays and to the hardware store when I feel like tinkering. I make notes, keep lists, and double-check locks the way Elaine always did. I live carefully, but not confused. My children, though, they look at me and see something else. Laura, the eldest, is practical to the point of cruelty. She runs a department in a large company, and I suspect she runs her home with the same clipped efficiency. She talks about planning ahead and avoiding unnecessary risks as if I were a corporate liability instead of her father. David, always the dreamer, has burned through 3 business ventures already, each leaving him a little more desperate than the last. He smiles big, but I can hear the strain in his voice when he talks about investments and opportunities. And Ben, the youngest, is kind but weak. He nods along with whoever speaks the loudest, which usually means his older sister or brother. I know the value of this house. I know how much they each could use a slice of it. And I can see the way they glance at the cherry tree in the yard, the tree Elaine and I planted the year Laura was born, not with nostalgia, but calculation. They think I should move out, settle into some polished community, with shuttle buses and scheduled bridge games, and free up the property while I still breathe. But I am not done here. Not with this house, not with this life. And certainly not with proving to my own blood that I am not the feeble man they have decided I am. It started small. My wallet turned up in the freezer, wedged next to a bag of peas I had never bought. The sight of it stopped me cold. I stood there with the freezer door open, feeling the hum of the motor against my hand, staring at my leather wallet frosted over like it had been put there on purpose. My fingers shook, not because I was scared, but because I knew myself. I have lived in this house for over 4 decades. I know where I place things. I am a creature of habit. My keys go in the bowl by the door, my glasses on the mantel, and my wallet in the nightstand left drawer, 3rd compartment, always. That routine hasn't failed me once, not through work stress, not through grief, not through age. When I mentioned it to Laura later that day, she laughed, a bright, dismissive laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Come on, Dad," she said. "You always put things in strange places." She waved it off like it was the most natural thing in the world. But I don't. I never have. I've never once put a single item of mine in the freezer, not a coin, not a note, not a wallet. It unsettled me more than I let on. If I had truly done it myself, then perhaps my children were right to worry. But if I hadn't, if someone else had, well, then the game was a different one entirely. Then came the saucepan. I returned from church one Tuesday morning, a pleasant service followed by coffee and chatter in the parish hall, to the sharp, acrid smell of burned metal in my kitchen. My saucepan, the one Elaine used to make her chicken stew, sat scorched and smoking on the stove, its bottom charred black as coal. The stove dial was still turned on low, as if someone had set it deliberately. My first instinct was alarm. Had I left it? Had I been careless? But no, I had left the house at 9 sharp, the stove clean and cold. When David dropped by that afternoon, I showed him the damage. He sighed dramatically, as though he were a disappointed schoolteacher catching a pupil cheating. Absent-minded, he muttered, shaking his head. He carried the pan to the sink like it weighed more than it did, set it down, and gave a cluck of his tongue that dripped with disapproval. Then, as if rehearsed, he slid a glossy brochure across the counter. Cedar Grove Memory Care, with smiling gray-haired people playing cards under perfect sunshine. Just options, he said. No pressure. But the way his eyes lingered on me, watching for my reaction, told me there was nothing casual about it. Inside, I felt the first real crack of dread. 2 incidents might be coincidence, but 2 so perfectly suited to make me look incompetent. No. My children thought they were clever, but they underestimated me. A man who spent nearly 40 years debugging computer systems learns to spot patterns, especially the kind that are not supposed to be there. And these mistakes in my life did not feel like mine. They felt planted. Inside, I felt the first real crack of dread. 2 incidents might be coincidence, but 2 so perfectly suited to make me look incompetent. No. My children thought they were clever, but they underestimated me. A man who spent nearly 40 years debugging computer systems learns to spot patterns, especially the kind that are not supposed to be there. I sat at the kitchen table that evening with the scorched pan on the counter behind me and my wallet still drying from the freezer. I kept glancing at Elaine's photo on the wall, the one I talked to before bed. She would have frowned at me for letting the children get under my skin, but she would also have told me to trust my instincts. Elaine always said there were 2 kinds of people in this world, those who made you feel steadier on your feet, and those who chipped at your footing until you doubted your own balance. My wife never chipped. She steadied. The truth is, when you lose someone like her, the world already tries to make you feel small. Neighbors speak louder than they used to, as though grief also stole your hearing. Bank tellers ask if you need a helper on your accounts. Even the mailman calls me, sir, in the tone he uses with children. I could live with that. But I could not live with my own blood trying to shave down the edges of my dignity, piece by piece, until I doubted my own mind. I tried to brush it off. I told myself that vigilance might be paranoia in disguise. But then came the checkbook. It was Ben this time. He came over on a Saturday, cheerful and soft-spoken as always, bringing a box of muffins from the bakery. After we sat down, he leaned into the couch cushions, reached behind him, and came up holding my checkbook like he had discovered buried treasure. "Dad, you forgot where you put the bills again," he said with a sigh, offering the leather-bound book out to me like a disappointed parent. Except here's the problem, the cushion he pulled it from was zipped. I hadn't opened that checkbook in over a year, not since switching everything to autopay with the bank. And even if I had, why would it be there? I felt my throat go dry. A wave of shame passed through me, not because I believed him, but because I realized how easily someone else might. If my children were willing to go this far, manufacturing mistakes, planting evidence of confusion, then the truth didn't matter anymore. Only the story they told about me would matter. I smiled faintly, thanked him, and took the book. But inside, my mind was racing. I was no longer wondering if this was deliberate. I was starting to wonder just how far they were willing to go. After the checkbook, the pattern became undeniable. It was as if once they saw I hadn't protested, they grew bolder. First came the pills. I had been taking the same brand of vitamins for years, bought from the same pharmacy, the same orange bottles with the same white caps. One afternoon, I opened the cabinet and noticed the cap felt different, gritty, as though someone had twisted it open with hands dusted in flour. The pills inside looked off too, slightly chalkier, a shade paler than I remembered. I wanted to believe I was imagining it. But then, after a few days of taking them, I noticed something I could not explain away. I would wake foggy, as if I had been drinking, though I had touched no alcohol. My head felt heavy, my vision slow to catch up with itself, halos of light trailing across the kitchen whenever I turned too quickly. On those days, I caught myself repeating things, stumbling over words, forgetting what I'd walked into a room for. I wrote it all down on the clipboard I kept in the pantry, the one that had seen me through Elaine's last months. Dates. Dosages. Symptoms. And the more I wrote, the clearer the picture became. It wasn't age. It wasn't grief. Something was being done to me. Then the phone call came. A voice, professional and smooth, told me my bank had noticed suspicious activity on my account. He asked me to confirm my address, then hesitated, waiting, as though he were reading something from a screen. My gut clenched. I hung up. When I called the number on the back of my debit card, the Real Bank told me they had made no such call. My account was untouched. The suspicious activity was the phone call itself. A week later, my mail stopped arriving. No bills, no letters, not even the junk flyers the grocery store always sends. I went to the post office and asked, and the clerk told me there had been a change of address request filed for me. To where? He wouldn't say. He just frowned and said, "It happens sometimes," like it was nothing. But I had never filed such a request. Someone else had. I signed the form to block the change, had the mail rerouted back, and went home with my fists clenched tighter than I'd held them in years. At that point, the message from my children was deafening. They wanted me disoriented. They wanted me confused. They wanted me to believe I was losing my grip on reality, and if that failed, they wanted everyone else to believe it. And I knew, if I did not act soon, they just might succeed. The incidents were coming so regularly now that I almost expected them. But it was the smallest, strangest one that finally made my decision for me. It happened on a Wednesday evening. I was setting the table for myself, as I often do out of habit. 2 plates, 2 glasses, even though it has been 5 years since Elaine passed. It feels wrong to set just one. When I opened the silverware drawer, I froze. The spoons were all turned upside down. Every single one. Not stacked in my neat, careful order, the one Elaine had drilled into the children when they were small, but deliberately flipped so that the bowls faced down. The forks were shifted too, some tucked under the dividers instead of in their slot. It was such a small thing. Something you could overlook, laugh off, call clumsiness. But I had not done it. And no guest had been in that drawer besides family. I stood there gripping the edge of the counter, my heart thumping like I had run a mile. This was no accident. This was theater. Someone had come into my kitchen, touched my things, and rearranged them just enough to leave me unsettled, to make me wonder whether I had done it myself. I shut the drawer quietly, as though whoever had done it might still be listening. For the first time in my own house, I felt like an intruder. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan turning slow circles above me, my wife's photo watching from the nightstand. I realized I had been documenting the wrong things: wallets, pans, checkbooks. Those were props. The real story was the intent behind them. Someone wanted me to doubt the evidence of my own senses. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I picked up the phone and dialed Marty. He answered in his usual calm, steady voice. "Marty," I said, my throat dry. "I think my kids are trying to make me believe I'm losing my mind." There was silence on the other end, the kind of silence that isn't disbelief, but calculation. I could almost hear him pressing his thumb against his lip the way he used to during exams, running through possibilities before he spoke. "What makes you think that?" he asked finally, his voice steady, like he was coaxing me to lay the cards on the table. So I did. I told him about the wallet in the freezer, the scorched pan, the checkbook under the cushion. I described the strange phone call, the missing mail, the silverware turned upside down. And then, haltingly, I told him about the vitamins, the cap gritty with dust, the color of the tablets just a shade wrong, the fog that had settled over my mind on the days I took them. When I finished, there was another pause. Then Marty said, low and firm, "Richard, that fog you're describing, it isn't grief. It sounds like a sedative, or worse." My stomach tightened. I knew it wasn't me. I knew it. "Listen carefully," he said, and now there was no hesitation in his tone, only the practiced authority of the medic he had trained to be. "Bring me everything, the pill bottles, the clipboard with your notes, even the mug you've been drinking from. Don't throw anything away, don't wash anything out. And Richard," his voice sharpened, "do not take another dose until I've looked at them myself." I gripped the receiver, suddenly aware that my hand was trembling. For the first time in weeks, the fear in my chest loosened. It was still there, but no longer alone. Marty believed me. And if Marty believed me, then I wasn't mad. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of relief. I wasn't going to face this alone. I did not wait until morning. The moment I hung up the phone, I swept the bottles into a paper bag, vitamins, supplements, even the aspirin I kept in the cupboard. I slid the clipboard in after them, my notes neat and damning, then grabbed the mug from the sink and wrapped it in a dish towel. I moved through the house quickly, like a man escaping a fire. Every creak of the floorboards made me twitch. Every shadow felt too sharp, as if someone were watching from the corner of the room. I told myself it was imagination, but after the silverware, after the scorched pan, after the checkbook, how could I trust my own home? My house, Elaine's house, no longer felt safe. I drove the 10 minutes to Marty's neighborhood without the radio on. The silence inside the car pressed on my ears. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard the knuckles turned white. Twice I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Laura's beige sedan or David's pickup tailing me. The streets were empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that if I waited even one more day, something else would go wrong, something worse. Maybe a pot left boiling over until the smoke alarm screamed. Maybe an unlocked door. Maybe me waking up in the hospital, with all three of them standing around the bed shaking their heads sadly. When Marty opened his front door, I all but shoved the bag into his hands. "It's all here," I said, my voice harsher than I meant it to be. "Every pill, every note. Before they try something else." He didn't flinch. He just nodded once, calm as always, and stepped aside to let me in. "Good," he said. "You were right to come now. Let's see what they've been giving you." Marty led me straight to the kitchen, where the same yellow lamp from our college days now hung over a tidy oak table. He spread out a newspaper and motioned for the bag. I set it down like evidence on a detective's desk. He opened the vitamin bottle first, shook a few tablets into his palm, and held them up under the light. He squinted, turned one over with a fingertip, then reached for a magnifying glass from the drawer. "Wrong imprint," he muttered. "See that? And the shape, slightly off. Richard, these don't match what you should have been taking." My mouth went dry. "So they've been tampered with." "Looks like it. But I don't want to guess," Marty said firmly, slipping the pills into a small plastic bag he produced from a folder of medical odds and ends. "We'll send them to a colleague of mine at the clinic. Quietly. He can run a proper analysis. Until then, you don't touch a single one of these." "Not one." I nodded, my hands clenched on my knees. The thought that I'd swallowed God knows what because I trusted my own children made bile rise in my throat. Marty put a steady hand on my shoulder, grounding me. "Listen. Whatever's going on here, you are not crazy. You're sharp as a tack, Richard. You took notes, you saw patterns, and you came to me. That's not dementia, that's discipline. That's exactly the kind of mind I've always known you to have." For the first time in weeks, I exhaled without feeling like I was betraying myself. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee, and the steady hum of Marty's refrigerator was the most reassuring sound I'd heard in months. We drank tea, and he told me about his youngest grandchild learning to walk, about how his knees creaked when he climbed stairs but his mind felt sharper since retiring. For a little while, I wasn't a man under siege. I was just Richard again, sitting with my old friend. When I finally stood to leave, the weight in my chest had lightened. My paranoia seemed almost silly, like a nightmare you half believe until morning comes. Marty promised to call the moment the lab results came back. He even laughed as he walked me to the door. "And if your kids try anything else, you ring me before you even put your shoes on." I laughed too. For a brief, blessed moment, I believed it was over. But when I pulled into my driveway that night, the porch light I always leave on was dark. The switch inside had been flipped. And the relief drained out of me as quickly as it had come. When I stepped back into my house, the dark felt different. Not the natural dark of evening, but the kind that seemed to wait for me. The porch light, flipped off from inside, left the entryway in shadow. I flicked the switch back up with a stiff hand, half expecting it not to respond, but the bulb glowed obediently. Still, the air felt heavy. I checked the stove knobs, one by one. All at 12 o'clock, the way I'd left them. The silverware was still right side up, at least for now. I tried to tell myself nothing had changed, but the hairs at the back of my neck stood anyway. I locked the doors, checked the windows twice, and sat in my chair by the living room lamp. The house was quiet, but it was no longer mine in the same way it had always been. Every creak sounded intentional, every hum of the refrigerator like a breath behind me. I went to bed late, and when I finally slept, it was the shallow kind that wakes you at the smallest sound. 3 days later, Marty called. His voice was calm, but beneath it I could hear the steel. "Richard, I've got the report." My pulse quickened. "And?" "The pills aren't vitamins. They're a sedating antipsychotic, low dose, but enough to make you foggy, to slow your speech, to make you doubt yourself if you didn't know better. Whoever swapped these bottles knew what they were doing." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles cracked. So I wasn't imagining it. "You weren't," he said. "And more importantly, now we have proof. Real proof, with a lab name and a chemical breakdown. This isn't suspicion anymore, Richard, it's evidence." For the first time in weeks, I felt anger burn hotter than fear. They wanted me confused, helpless, ready to be tucked away in a comfortable community, while they carved up my life. But I wasn't confused. I wasn't helpless. And now, thanks to Marty, I had the truth in my hands. Marty invited me back over that evening. When I arrived, he had already cleared his oak kitchen table and spread out a yellow legal pad, the same kind we used to scrawl notes on during college all-nighters. Only this time, the subject wasn't algorithms. It was survival. Step 1, Marty said, pen poised, baseline. He explained that we needed a clean neuropsych evaluation from a doctor he trusted. If they try to paint you as confused, we'll already have proof you're not. Hard data, notarized. That shuts down their argument before it starts. I nodded slowly, feeling the truth of it settle inside me. My children had been trying to manufacture a story about me, the confused old man, the forgetful widower, the liability. What Marty was offering wasn't just medicine, it was armor. Step 2, he continued, evidence. He pointed at the bagged pills, now sealed and labeled. We've got the lab results, but we'll need more. Cameras in the house. Recorders in key places. Motion sensors, if we can manage it. If they try another stunt, we'll catch them in the act. I swallowed hard. The thought of wiring my home like a crime scene made me ache. That house had been a sanctuary for decades. Elaine painted the walls herself. Every nick in the stair railing told a story of children running, laughing, living. And now I was about to turn it into a stage for betrayal. But then I thought of the scorched pan, the upside-down silverware, the bitterness in my tea after Laura stirred it. If I didn't protect the house, it wouldn't be a home anymore, it would be theirs to twist against me. Step 3, Marty said, his pen scratching across the page, lawyer. He looked up, meeting my eyes. We move the house into a trust, update your will, lock down your finances. If this is about money, and I'm willing to bet it is, then we cut them off at the knees. They can't take what they can't reach. I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. He was right. All of it. And yet a part of me mourned as I listened. These were my children. The same hands that once reached for mine when they were small were now planting pills and faking phone calls. How had love soured into this? But sorrow had its place, and this was not it. Elaine had steadied me through every storm of my life. Now I would steady myself. For her. For Lily and Sam. For the dignity I refused to surrender. I looked at the list Marty had made, baseline, evidence, lawyer, and felt something I hadn't in weeks: clarity. "They think they're writing my story," I said quietly. "But I'm not giving them the pen." Marty gave a rare, tight smile. "Good. Because the next move is ours." The first step was the doctor. Marty drove me himself, a quiet show of solidarity that steadied my nerves. The clinic sat on the edge of town, a low brick building that smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. The geriatric specialist was a sharp-eyed woman named Dr. Patel, the kind of person who noticed if you tapped your fingers twice on the armrest. She asked me to draw a clock, remember a list of words, subtract backward by sevens. I answered her questions about the date, the season, the president. I told her about my habits: morning coffee, crossword puzzles, church choir. She nodded, scribbling notes with efficient strokes. When the exam ended, she looked me dead in the eye. "Mr. Hale, your memory and cognition are well above average for your age. You're clear, focused, and perfectly capable of making decisions about your life." She signed the report in front of me, notarized it at the desk, and handed me a copy as though sealing it in stone. Walking out of that office, I felt taller than I had in weeks. The next step was the house. Marty arrived with a small box of gadgets, tiny cameras, motion recorders, and something his nephew had 3D printed to monitor the gas valve. We moved through the rooms together, almost like we had in college when we wired our dorm for speakers. A camera in the sugar bowl, another tucked into the bookshelf speaker. A voice recorder slipped under the hall table. UV pen marks on the stove knobs that only showed under blacklight. A simple contact sensor on the gas line. Each placement made my stomach twist, because it was proof I couldn't trust my own children in the house Elaine and I had built together. But each click of the recorder, each careful placement of a lens, also steadied me. If they came again, if they tried another trick, this time I'd have the truth on my side. When Marty left that evening, the house didn't feel quite so hostile. It was still quiet, still heavy, but now it was watching with me instead of against me. I sat down at the kitchen table, the legal pad with Marty's steps in front of me, and ran a finger along the first line we had crossed off: baseline. Evidence in progress. And for the first time, I didn't feel like prey. It happened on a gray Thursday morning, the kind of day when the air feels heavy with something unsaid. I was sipping my coffee, rereading the doctor's report for the 10th time, when the doorbell rang. David stood on the porch with Laura half a step behind him. They wore identical masks of concern, too smooth, too rehearsed. "Dad," Laura said, wrinkling her nose theatrically, "do you smell that? Like gas?" I stiffened. I didn't smell anything except my coffee and the faint lemon oil from the table I'd polished the night before. Behind them, David was already pulling out his phone. "This is dangerous," he said, his voice clipped, urgent. "We should call 911. The detector on the wall blinked green, silent. My utility bill, still sitting on the counter, said everything was normal. But I didn't argue. Instead, I stepped aside and gestured toward the kitchen. "Do what you think is best." David moved fast, too fast. He didn't call 911, he thumbed through his contacts and pressed a different number. I couldn't see the screen, but I heard the way he said, "emergency," with too much calm in his voice. While he waited, he strode to the stove, bent down, and with what he must have thought was a subtle twist, turned one of the knobs just enough for it to click. The sound echoed through the kitchen. Sharp. Artificial. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I kept my face still. The camera in the sugar bowl saw it. The UV pen on the knob would glow on his fingertips later. I let the trap close itself. Laura hovered near the counter, hand on her chest like a woman in a soap opera. "Dad, you must not have noticed. You probably left it on when you were cooking. That's so dangerous. What if the house caught fire?" Her words dripped with pity, but her eyes glittered. Watching. Measuring. Waiting for me to falter. I did not. I folded the doctor's notarized report and slid it into my shirt pocket, just to feel the weight of it there. 10 minutes later, a utility worker arrived, broad-shouldered, tool belt jangling. He checked the lines, the meter, the valves. His hands moved with the ease of a man who has done the same inspection 1,000 times. Finally, he shook his head. "No leaks. Everything's fine here." He signed a service slip and handed it to me. "If you smell something again, call us right away, but I don't see a problem." Laura's face pinched, the way it did when her plans at work didn't quite land. David muttered something about being cautious. They left soon after, both wearing strained smiles. I stood in the doorway, watching their car roll down the street, my fingers tight around the service slip. Proof. In black ink. For weeks they had been trying to gaslight me, literally, this time. And for the first time, I wasn't the only witness. When I closed the door and locked it, my heart was still thudding. Not from fear. From anger. They thought they could turn my own house against me. But the house was on my side now. It was 2 nights after the gas leak incident. I had gone to bed early, not out of fatigue, but to see whether my house, wired as it now was, would finally reveal what I had begun to suspect. At the night, the soft creak of the back door woke me. My body froze, but my mind stayed sharp. I always lock my doors, always. If someone was inside, it meant they had a key. And only 3 people had keys I hadn't reclaimed. I slid silently from the bed and stood in the dark of the hallway, listening. My ears caught the faintest shuffle in the kitchen, followed by the scrape of metal against metal. I knew that sound. The gas knobs. Every muscle in my chest tightened. But then, another sound. The deliberate clatter of pans being rearranged, louder than necessary, as though someone wanted me to find them in the wrong place in the morning. I didn't move. I didn't speak. Instead, I imagined the small black lens hidden in the sugar bowl, staring unblinking at the scene. The bookshelf camera, angled just so toward the stove. The recorder under the hall table, already storing every sound. Whoever was in my kitchen thought they were writing my downfall. What they didn't know was that they had become the actors in their own undoing. After several minutes, the steps retreated, the back door whispered open again, and the house was still. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. My hands, though, trembled, not from fear, but from the quiet, private relief that this time I had them. Dead to rights. I walked into the kitchen once I was sure they were gone. One burner knob was twisted halfway open, not enough for a flame, just enough for the faint hiss of gas. The pan that should have been hanging by the stove was balanced precariously on the edge of the counter, ready to crash in the night and prove I had grown clumsy. I turned the knob back to 0. I set the pan gently on its hook. Then I stood there in the glow of the nightlight, letting the camera catch one last frame of me reclaiming my own kitchen. For the first time since this began, I felt calm. Let them keep staging their little dramas. Every script they wrote, every scene they played, my house was recording. And when the curtain finally fell, it would not be me standing in the light as the confused old man. It would be them, exposed for what they had become. The next morning, I packed up the memory cards and the service slip from the gas company into a manila envelope and drove to Marty's house. My hands gripped the steering wheel with a kind of grim satisfaction. For weeks I'd felt like prey. Now, finally, I carried proof. Marty met me at the door with his steady eyes and ushered me straight to his den, where a laptop sat waiting. I handed over the envelope like contraband. He slipped on his glasses, loaded the footage, and hit play. The sugar bowl camera lit up first. Grainy in the low light, but clear enough, the back door opening, a figure stepping inside. The angle caught David's profile as he bent down by the stove, his hand twisting the knob open with deliberate precision. Marty paused the frame, zoomed in until David's hand filled the screen, faintly glowing under the UV I had marked on the dial. Marty gave a low whistle. There it is. Caught in the act. He let the video roll. David shuffled pans, tugged at the cookware until one hung precariously over the counter's edge, then glanced around the kitchen like a burglar in his own father's home. Finally, he slipped out again, quiet as a shadow. We sat in silence for a moment, listening to the faint hiss the recorder had picked up from the half-open burner. Then Marty closed the laptop, folded his hands, and looked at me. You realize, he said, this isn't just family drama anymore. This is criminal negligence at best, attempted harm at worst. If that burner had been left overnight, you could have been found dead in your sleep. They're building a case for incompetence, Richard, but what they're really building is a case against themselves. I leaned back in the chair, my chest tight but steady. Relief mixed with grief in my stomach. My own son, creeping into my house to make me look insane. And yet, instead of shame, I felt clarity. No more doubt. No more second-guessing. Marty reached for his phone. I know exactly who we need to talk to. Elaine Hopkins. Estate and elder law specialist. Sharp as a razor. She won't just protect you, she'll make sure this whole scheme blows up in their faces. The name rang a bell. I'd heard it at church once, whispered with the kind of respect you give a person who always wins. Marty placed a hand on my shoulder. You've got the truth, Richard. Now it's time to weaponize it. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a man defending himself. I felt like a man preparing for battle. Marty made the call right there in his den. He spoke with the crisp efficiency of a man who knew exactly what mattered and what didn't. Elaine Hopkins, he said into the receiver. Yes, this is Martin Klein. I have a client, Richard Hale. Urgent matter. Elder exploitation and estate protection. Tomorrow. Good. We'll be there. When he hung up, he looked at me with the calm of a surgeon who had just scheduled an operation. You'll meet her tomorrow morning, Richard. Don't worry, she's the kind who doesn't just read contracts, she carves them. I felt a strange, conflicted steadiness. Relief that someone so formidable was about to step into my corner, and sorrow that it had come to this. Hiring a lawyer against my own children. Still, I knew it had to be done. If Elaine were alive, she'd have said the same. I drove back home, the house waiting for me in the quiet dusk. The porch light glowed the way I'd left it this time. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the familiar creak of the entryway greeting me. But I didn't get more than 10 minutes of peace before the knock came. Laura. David. Ben. All three together, an ambush in broad daylight. Laura held a manila folder like a shield, David wore his salesman's grin, and Ben lingered behind them with the guilty eyes of a child dragged into mischief. "We've been talking, Dad," Laura began, her tone syrupy sweet, the kind she used when firing people at her company. "You've had some incidents lately. And we've come up with a solution that will really take the burden off you." I said nothing, just stepped aside. They filed into the kitchen like they owned it. Laura slid the folder across the table. "It's a power of attorney form. Temporary, just until we get things sorted. One of us can help manage your bills, medications, important paperwork. It'll keep everything safe, Dad." My chest tightened. Safe. That word again. Safe for whom? David leaned in, lowering his voice like he was offering me a hot tip on the stock market. "We could even move you into a short-term trial stay at Cedar Grove. Just to see if you like it. No pressure. We already spoke with the intake coordinator, your room could be ready within a week." Ben shifted in his chair, eyes on the floor. "It's just easier for everyone, Dad." I sat still, hands folded, forcing my expression into calm. They were bold now, bolder than ever. They had escalated from freezer wallets and scorched pans to legal documents and placement forms. They thought they had me cornered, weakened, malleable. But tomorrow I had a meeting with Elaine Hopkins. And tucked away in Marty's den was footage of their sabotage, ready to slice through every word they spoke. I gave a slow nod, masking the fire in my chest. "I'll think about it." Laura's smile widened in triumph. David slapped the table lightly, as if the matter were settled. Ben exhaled with visible relief. They left shortly after, convinced they had me in hand. The moment the door closed, I locked it and leaned against the wood, my jaw tight. "Think about it," I whispered. "Oh, I will. And when the time comes, you won't like my answer." Elaine Hopkins's office sat over a bank, quiet and precise, all glass and dark wood. She shook my hand, looked me in the eye, and in the span of 3 seconds I understood why people lowered their voices when they said her name. Marty did the introductions. "This is Richard Hale. We've got lab-confirmed medication tampering, recorded sabotage in his home, and family pressure toward involuntary placement." Elaine listened without interrupting as we laid out the sequence: wallet in the freezer, scorched pan, the doctored pills, the gas leak, the midnight visit caught on camera. Marty slid the manila folder across her desk, the lab report, the service slip from the gas company, stills from the footage, my notes. She paged through everything fast, but not carelessly. "All right," she said. "We treat this on 2 tracks, protection and proof." "Protection first," I said. My voice sounded older to me than it had yesterday. "Good," she replied, and began. "Title and deed. We move your home into an irrevocable trust with you as settlor and a neutral successor trustee. Not a relative. I'll recommend one. That prevents anyone from using best interests to pry you out for the asset. Decision-making. We revoke any old powers of attorney and healthcare proxies. New POA to someone you trust implicitly who is not trying to place you, Marty, if you're willing. Healthcare proxy as well. We notarize today. Certified copies go to your bank, primary care, and on file here. Beneficiaries and deterrence. Your will and trusts will include a no contest clause, Any heir who attempts to force placement or interferes with your medical autonomy without medical necessity forfeits their share. Clean, enforceable. Financial containment. We lock down your accounts, branch notes, callback codes, and bank-level flags requiring in-person verification with passphrase only you and Marty know. We'll add trusted contact designations that specifically exclude your children. Physical security. Change the locks today. Revoke keys. I'll draft a written notice revoking permission to enter. Post it inside the foyer. If they enter after notice, it's trespass. Medical baseline. Marty produced Dr. Patel's evaluation. Elaine read the notarization, nodded. Excellent. We courier copy this to your file here and your primary care. This is your shield. Evidence management. She tapped the folder. We'll maintain a chain of custody log for these items. I'll have my runner pick up the originals from Marty's place and store them in our evidence cabinet. We'll also mirror the video files to 2 encrypted drives. External pressure points. Adult Protective Services gets a courtesy package. Not a formal complaint yet, an informational report with exhibits. It puts your case on their radar under risk of familial exploitation. And Cedar Grove? They get a letter from me this afternoon, no contact with you without counsel present, no deposits, no pre-admission evaluations. If they've taken money from your children in your name, we demand an immediate refund. Communication protocol. From now on, all family communication about your health or housing goes through my office, in writing. You don't debate in kitchens. If they show up, you don't argue. You hand them my card and close the door. She paused and looked at me, measuring whether I could carry this. Mr. Hale, can you follow those steps? Yes, I said. It surprised me how firm it sounded. Good. 2 more items. She slid a pen toward me and turned a sheet. A letter of instruction to your primary care, no medication changes unless ordered by named physicians. Pharmacy must notify you and your proxy of any formulary substitutions. And a directive to the post office disputing any change of address requests. We'll file both today. Marty leaned back, a hand on my shoulder. We'll change the locks on the way home. Elaine signed, stamped, and stacked. Her paralegal appeared and vanished with papers the way a good pit crew moves tires. When we reached the will updates, she slowed her cadence. You asked that your grandchildren's portions be placed in a spendthrift trust. We'll do that. Separate trustee, distributions for education and health. Their parents cannot touch it. I felt something unclench in my chest. Lily's cedar chest. Sam's fishing lessons. Parts of the future no one could skim. Elaine capped her pen. Last thing, your expectations. Your children will likely escalate once they hit these walls. They may arrive with an officer for a wellness check. If so, you present your ID, this evaluation, and this card. She slid me 2 laminated copies. You are courteous and brief. You do not invite anyone in without a warrant. You call me. Understood? Understood. She stood, signaling the meeting was over only because she'd already moved the mountain. My runner will collect the videos from Mr. Klein today. Locks first. Then go home and rest. Let me do the worrying. On the sidewalk outside, the day felt clearer, the edges of buildings newly sharp. Marty grinned sideways. She carves them, all right. She does, I said. We stopped at the hardware store. New locks. Fresh keys, just 2 copies, one for me, one for Marty. As the machine ground metal, I realized my hands were steady. For weeks, I'd been trying to prove to myself I wasn't losing my mind. Now I had something better than self-assurance. I had a plan, signatures, timestamps, and a lawyer with teeth. We drove home. The house waited, familiar and watchful. And for the first time since all this began, crossing the threshold felt like stepping into my own life, not their story. That evening, after Marty dropped me off with a box of fresh locks and Elaine Hopkins's crisp instructions folded in my jacket pocket, the silence of the house pressed in again. But it was no longer the silence of suspicion. It carried something else, something steadier. Her name stayed with me, Elaine Hopkins. Of all the lawyers in this city, in this state, Marty had brought me to a woman who shared my wife's name. Elaine. I said it aloud once in the kitchen, softly, and for a moment it was as if my wife herself had stepped back into the room. I don't believe in signs, not really. I spent a career trusting numbers, systems, and code, not stars or whispers from above. But as I unfolded the paperwork she had prepared, lines that cut sharper than knives, protections stamped and sealed, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe my Elaine had reached out one last time. Maybe she had seen the children circling like vultures, and this Hopkins woman was her way of reminding me that I was not abandoned, not alone. I remembered the last night of my wife's life, her hand weak but steady in mine as she whispered, "Take care of them." And I had tried. God, how I had tried. But maybe she hadn't only meant the children. Maybe she had meant me. Take care of yourself, Richard. Protect what we built. Don't let them undo it. For the first time in weeks, the fear in my chest loosened. The locks, the cameras, the lawyer, they were shields, yes, but more than that, they were reminders. That my wife's steadiness lived on, that her name was etched again into the fabric of my life at the very moment I needed it most. Tomorrow, I would wake up and drink my coffee as always. Tomorrow, the children would come with another solution, their eyes hungry for control. And tomorrow, when they sat at my table and smiled their false smiles, I would remember, Elaine was watching. Through every clause, every page, every safeguard, she was still guarding me. This battle wasn't just mine anymore. It was ours. The next proposal came just 3 days later. Laura called first, her tone clipped but cheerful, like a manager preparing to check in on an underperforming employee. "Dad, we're dropping by this afternoon. We just want to talk about making things simpler for you." I knew better than to refuse. When they arrived, all 3 of them came together again, a show of unity. Laura carried a stack of envelopes, David his usual plastic smile, and Ben trailed behind with a nervous shuffle. "Dad," Laura said, laying the envelopes down on the kitchen table. "We've been a little worried. Your mail's been piling up. Bills, statements, letters, all untouched." I frowned. My mail had been light lately, yes, but certainly not unopened. I checked it every morning, the same way I checked the locks at night. "That's not true," I said evenly. But Laura was already fanning the envelopes out across the table. Utility bills. Insurance notices. A credit card statement. All with my name on them, and all still sealed. Except I knew I hadn't left them sealed. I remembered opening the gas bill just last week, the paper still folded on my desk. And yet here it sat again, pristine, as though I had never touched it. "Dad," David said, leaning in with mock concern, "this isn't safe. Missing payments, ignoring statements, it makes you vulnerable. What if your electricity had been shut off? What if a scammer got hold of your information? You could lose everything." Ben shifted uneasily. "Maybe we could help. Just, take this little task off your plate. One of us could manage your mail. Pay the bills, handle the details. You wouldn't even have to think about it." There it was. Another solution. Another attempt to pry loose one more piece of my independence under the guise of kindness. I kept my face calm, but inside, a cold fury simmered. They had gone so far as to intercept my mail, open what I opened, reseal what I had read, and bring it back to me as if I were a child too simple to tear an envelope. All to create a picture of absent-mindedness, forgetfulness, decline. I folded my hands, nodded slowly, and said, "I'll think about it too." Laura smiled, triumphant. David clapped me lightly on the shoulder. Ben exhaled, as though relieved. But as they left, the camera tucked into the bookshelf speaker blinked silently. It had caught everything, the envelopes being laid out, the words they spoke, the patronizing smiles on their faces. For once, I didn't feel shaken. I felt steady. They thought they were framing me as absent-minded. What they didn't realize was that every move they made was being preserved, proof of their scheme, not my decline. And when the time came, those envelopes would damn them, not me. They came again the following Sunday, this time without muffins or brochures. No smiles either. Laura walked in like she owned the place, David close behind her, Ben dragging his feet as usual. I was in the kitchen, pouring tea. Laura's eyes went straight to the cabinet where I kept my medication. She didn't even bother with small talk. "Dad," she said, too calmly, "we need to check your pills." I set the teapot down slowly. "Why?" "Because," David cut in, his voice sharp, "something's not right. You've been too alert. Too defensive. You don't seem like yourself." It was almost laughable. They wanted me foggy, pliable. But now, seeing me steady and clear-eyed, they suspected the script was off. Laura opened the cabinet without asking. She pulled down the bottles, twisted one open, shook the pills into her palm. "These don't look right," she muttered, her tone rehearsed, but her eyes flickered, nervous. "You've mixed things up again, haven't you, Dad?" she said, louder now, for effect. "This is dangerous. You could hurt yourself." "No," I said quietly. "I haven't." David's hand slammed against the counter. "This is exactly what we've been talking about. Absent-minded, unsafe. You can't even manage your own medication. It's not fair to put us in this position." Ben stood by the doorway, shifting, looking anywhere but at me. "Maybe we should just get him evaluated again. Right away." The heat in the room thickened. They were cornered and they knew it. The pills in their hands weren't the tampered ones, they were the safe replacements Marty had given me. Their evidence had betrayed them. I kept my face calm, though inside my heart was pounding. The camera in the sugar bowl was recording every word, every accusation. Their frustration, their slips of the tongue, their insistence that I was too lucid to be believable, captured. I stood, steadying my voice. "If you're so concerned, we'll ask my doctor." She gave me a clean bill of health. "Would you like to see the notarized report?" Laura froze. David's jaw tightened. Ben finally looked up, his face pale. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Laura shoved the bottle back into the cabinet, her voice clipped. This isn't over. They left soon after, tension trailing them out the door. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the pills on the shelf, the teapot still steaming. They were rattled now. They had realized the plan wasn't going smoothly, that their father wasn't stumbling into the trap they'd built. And I knew what came next. They wouldn't stop. They would escalate. But so would I. The crisis came on a damp evening, just after rain had soaked the garden and left the cherry tree dripping in the yard. I had been running on little sleep, my nerves wound tight from the last confrontation over my medication. The exhaustion was real, my body heavy, my head aching. That was when the knock came. Hard. Urgent. Laura managed to push the door open before I could reach it. David followed close, his voice booming, "Dad. What happened? You look terrible." I blinked at them, still in my chair, weary but far from incapable. "I'm tired," I said flatly. "That's all." But Laura was already at my side, kneeling down, grabbing my wrist as if checking a pulse. "You're clammy," she said, loud enough for Ben, who hovered at the door, to hear. "He's clammy. He's not thinking straight." David leaned in, face inches from mine. "Dad, listen to me. You can't keep doing this. You're not safe here on your own. You could have collapsed and no one would have known until it was too late." "I'm fine," I repeated, though my voice cracked with fatigue. Laura turned to her brothers. "This is the moment. He needs help now. Cedar Grove can take him immediately, they told me they have a room ready." She opened her folder and thrust the paperwork at me. "All we need is your signature. Just a short-term stay, Dad. Just until you're stable." Ben stepped forward hesitantly. "It's better this way, Dad. You'll be looked after." The three of them crowded around me, their faces a wall of pressure, their words a tide. Safe. Help. Just until. I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears. My exhaustion made me sluggish, but inside my mind a fire roared. They wanted me at my weakest. They had been waiting for this. I forced my hand onto the arm of the chair, pushed myself upright. My legs trembled, but I stood. "No," I said, each letter heavy, deliberate. "I am not signing. I am not going anywhere." Laura's face hardened, fury flashing behind her professional mask. David slammed the papers down on the table. "Dad, this isn't a debate. You're endangering yourself. You'll end up in the hospital, or worse." But behind their outrage, I caught it, the flicker of calculation. They weren't panicked about my health. They were angry that exhaustion hadn't broken me enough to make me compliant. What they didn't know was that the camera tucked in the bookshelf speaker was capturing all of it, Laura pressing the papers into my hands, David declaring, "This isn't a debate," Ben urging me to go. Not concern. Not love. Pressure. Force. And as I gripped the chair to steady myself, a new resolve cut through the fog in my head. They thought they had me cornered. But every word, every gesture was being preserved, evidence of coercion, not care. They left in frustration, muttering promises that they'd handle it. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, my body heavy but my mind sharper than ever. Exhausted or not, I would not let them win. And when the time came to show the world who was truly unfit, I would have the proof. The morning after the so-called medical crisis, I could still feel the weight of Laura's hand on my wrist, the papers shoved toward me, David's voice booming that it wasn't a debate. My body was tired, but my mind had burned away the last of its doubts. This was no longer family conflict. It was a war for my independence. I called Marty. "It's time." An hour later, I sat in Elaine Hopkins's office again, Marty steady at my side. The lawyer already had a thick folder open on her desk, tabs sticking out like the feathers of a hawk. I placed the newest memory card on the table. "They tried to force me last night. With documents. They wanted me to sign." Elaine slid the card into a laptop, adjusted her glasses, and pressed play. We sat in silence as Laura's voice filled the room, firm and calculating. "This is the moment. Cedar Grove can take him immediately. Then David, this isn't a debate. Then Ben's nervous echo, it's better this way." Elaine's expression didn't change, but when she paused the video, her hand flattened against the desk, deliberate. "That," she said, "is attempted undue influence. Clear coercion, caught on camera. Exactly what the courts and adult protective services look for. This isn't concern, Mr. Hale. This is exploitation." Marty leaned forward. "And with the lab report, the doctored pills, the gas leak, the fake mail, all of it, we have a full pattern." Elaine nodded. "More than enough. Here's what happens next. 1. We file a formal report with APS, supported by the footage and medical evaluation. 2. I submit a petition to the court affirming your competency, backed by Dr. Patel's notarized exam. That ends any attempt to portray you as confused. 3. We prepare a restraining notice. If they try to force you again, papers, placement, anything, you call me, and I bring it directly to a judge. Immediate injunction." She flipped a page in her folder, revealing a draft letter already prepared. "And 4, Cedar Grove receives this. It notifies them that any future communication about you without counsel will be considered participation in a fraudulent scheme. Their legal department will backpedal so fast they'll trip over their own brochures." I sat back, the words washing over me like a tide. For weeks I had been collecting scraps of sanity, doubting myself, waiting for someone to see what I saw. And now here it was, laid out, ordered, undeniable. Elaine folded her hands. "Mr. Hale, by the time we're finished, they won't be able to so much as suggest a retirement home without a paper trail leading them straight to a courtroom." Marty smiled faintly, the kind of smile that meant the pieces were all falling into place. "Justice isn't fast, Richard. But it's thorough. And now, it's on your side." For the first time in months, I felt it fully, not just relief, not just defiance, but certainty. They thought they had been writing my decline. Instead, they had been writing their own downfall, one staged incident at a time. I looked at Elaine, then at Marty. "Let's finish it." And I meant it. That night, after leaving Elaine's office, I sat at the kitchen table with a photo of Lily and Sam propped against the sugar bowl. Their wide grins, Lily with a missing tooth, Sam clutching a fishing rod twice his size, reminded me why I had fought this hard. I thought of what Elaine, my wife, had asked me with her last breath: take care of them. She had meant our children then. I had tried, and failed. But now her words lived in the faces of our grandchildren. I wondered if there was still a path back. If I showed their parents the truth, the footage, the pills, the doctor's report, maybe shame would bring them to their senses. Maybe they would stop before the courts, the police, and APS branded them as predators. For the sake of Lily and Sam, I wanted to try once more. So when Laura called 2 days later, I invited them over. All three arrived, expectant, as though I might finally bend. We sat in the living room, the weight of unspoken words pressing down on us. I looked at each of them in turn, Laura's clipped efficiency, David's restless charm, Ben's uneasy half-smile, and I spoke slowly. I know what you've been doing. The pills. The gas. The mail. I know. I let the silence stretch. But I'm giving you a chance. Stop. Step back. Be my children again. Because if you don't, it won't just be me you hurt. It'll be Lily and Sam. They'll grow up knowing their parents betrayed their grandfather for money. That's the legacy you're writing. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker in Ben's eyes, a waver in David's grin. But Laura only tilted her head, lips tightening into a thin line. Dad, she said, her voice syrupy with false patience, you're tired. You're paranoid. And frankly, this is exactly why we've been so concerned. She turned to David. Show him. David pulled out his phone, swiped, and set it on the coffee table. A Cedar Grove intake form glowed on the screen, already half filled with my information. We've scheduled a wellness transition for next week. They'll send staff to help with the move. All you need to do is sign the consent. It's already in motion, Dad. Fighting it will only make things harder. Ben shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. I sat very still, my heart beat loud in my ears. They hadn't listened. They hadn't wavered. Even after everything, after the chance I had offered, they had doubled down. Laura leaned forward, her voice dropping. This isn't about what you want anymore. It's about what's necessary. I looked down at the phone, the form glowing like a verdict. My last hope for reconciliation crumbled. For Lily and Sam's sake, I had tried. But for their parents' sake, I would not try again. The next time they crossed my threshold, it would not be as children pleading for control. It would be as defendants staring into the proof of their own betrayal. 2 evenings later, they came back, full of the same false confidence. Laura carried the manila folder with Cedar Grove's contract inside. David wore the expression of a man who thought he was about to close a deal. Ben trailed behind, head down, his silence heavier than words. I had asked them to come. But this time, I was not alone. Marty sat in the kitchen, calm and watchful. Elaine Hopkins was there too, her presence as sharp as a drawn blade. And waiting quietly in the living room, sipping water from a paper cup, were 2 people my children did not expect, an APS investigator and Sergeant Daly from the local precinct. The moment Laura spread the papers across the table, the trap closed. Dad, she said, her voice tight with frustration masked as care. It's time to stop fighting this. Sign, and we can all move forward. David nodded eagerly, pushing the pen toward me. It's for your safety. You'll thank us later. Ben's eyes flicked between me and the strangers at the far end of the room. He knew. His hands trembled. I looked at the forms, then at my children, their faces hungry, impatient, convinced they had me. Slowly, I placed my hand on the folder and slid it back across the table. No, I said. Laura opened her mouth to argue, but Elaine's voice cut in, cold and precise. Mr. Hale won't be signing anything tonight, or ever, without counsel. And you three need to hear something. She nodded to the APS investigator, who stood and placed a recorder on the table. We've reviewed the evidence, the investigator said calmly. The tampered medication. The staged gas leak. The video footage of you attempting to coerce your father. What we've seen is not care. It's exploitation. David's mouth fell open. Laura's face drained of color, then flushed dark. Ben sank into his chair, covering his eyes with his hands. Sergeant Daly leaned forward, his voice steady. You've been playing with fire. You tried to make your own father look incompetent, to force him into placement against his will. That ends now. From this moment, if you set foot on this property without his permission, it's trespass. If you interfere with his medical care or finances again, it's criminal. Silence swallowed the room. My children looked at me, not with love, not even with shame, but with the raw shock of people who had finally been seen for what they were. I felt my throat tighten. For all the preparation, all the strategy, this was the part one had dreaded, looking at the three people I had raised, and knowing the truth could not be undone. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photo of Lily and Sam, set it gently on the table between us. Their faces grinned up from the glossy paper, oblivious, innocent. This, I said quietly, is why I fought. Not for myself. For them. Because someday they'll ask me what happened. And I want to tell them the truth, that I gave their parents every chance. And that their parents chose greed instead. None of them spoke. Laura's eyes darted to the folder, as if wishing it would vanish. David clenched his fists. Ben wept silently, shoulders shaking. The APS investigator gathered the papers, tucking them into her case. Elaine packed up her files. Marty put a steady hand on my shoulder. When the door finally closed behind my children, the house seemed to exhale. I sat back in my chair, drained but steady. For the first time in months, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Peace. The house is quiet now, but it no longer feels like a cage. It feels like mine again. My children are gone from my doorstep, their shadows lifted, though the hurt they left behind will always ache in its own way. What remains is what matters. The laughter of Lily and Sam when they visit, filling the rooms with light I thought I had lost. The photo of my Elaine, steady on the mantel, reminding me that love can outlast betrayal. And Marty, my oldest friend, my anchor, without whom I might have been swallowed by the lies meant to undo me. I am not broken. I am still here. And I am grateful. For the second chances, for the strength I didn't know I had left, and for the people, young and old, who remind me why it was worth fighting.
Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed listening to this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help support the creation of more stories like this. Have a great day or evening.